Hi, fifth graders. It's Mrs. Clark, and I know you have all been bothering me to add some more stuff to my YouTube channel. Mrs. Clark's Adventures in Learning. I don't know what I named it, but I do love reading out loud, and I don't get to read out loud to my daughter anymore because she is now just reading on her own. So I can take advantage and share some of my favorite books that I have read out loud with my daughter or to other classes with you. And so I was going through my bookshelves today, and I just can't decide on the ones that I want to read first. So this one is called Among the Hidden, and it's by Margaret Peterson Haddix. And it's called Among the Hidden. And I read it to a sixth grade class and they loved it. They would never want me to stop reading. Just kind of like you guys don't want me to stop reading when I'm reading The War That Saved My Life. There's also this book called Tunnels, which I have never actually read out loud to anybody, but I devoured this whole series, and I thought it was a really great series, kind of Middle Earth, it was fun, and it kept me entertained. This has got to be one of my all-time favorites that I've read with Emily. It's called A Tale of Magic, and I recommended it to your parents during parent conferences. Even though I'm the math teacher, I couldn't help but recommend some reading books too. So I want to read that one to you. And then there's this beautiful book. Oh, I love this book. This is called Elsewhere. And it just is so interesting in the narrator's point of view and perspectives and foreshadowing and getting you thinking outside the box. So that might be one, but I have to make a decision for today. So, what's it going to be? I just don't know. I think I'm going to start with a small one, and that way we can get into the big one. And you'll have to pardon me. I went to get my little setup all together, and I realized that my little video recorder arm is a bit broken. So we are going to start with Among the Hidden by Margaret Peterson Haddix. And there is a whole series. It goes among the imposters, among the betrayed, among the barons, among the brave, among the enemy, and among the free. So if you really like this, you are welcome. I'm sure Mrs. Beck has the rest in hers. So that's already been 2 minutes, and I don't have my little dancers to do story time with Mrs. Clark. And I know that you're probably all doing it, but let's get started with the New York Times bestseller, Among the Hidden. Love this story. Chapter 1. Not a lot of pictures here. And I don't have my reading glasses on. Oh, they're nowhere near. So, oh well, guess we're just going to go for it. He saw the first tree shudder and fall, far off in the distance. Then he heard his mother call out the kitchen window, "Luke, inside, now!" He had never disobeyed the order to hide, even as a toddler. Barely able to walk in the backyard's tall grass, he had somehow understood the fear in his mother's voice. But on this day, the day they began taking the woods away, he hesitated. He took one extra breath of fresh air, scented with clover and honeysuckle, and coming from far away, pine smoke. He laid his hoe down gently and savored one last moment of feeling warm soil beneath his bare feet. He reminded himself, I will never be allowed outside again. Maybe never again, as long as I live. He turned and walked into the house as silently as a shadow. He might never be allowed outside his house ever again. Could you even imagine that? Why? He asked at the supper table at night. It wasn't a common question in the Gardner house. There were plenty of hows, how much rain the backfield get, how's the planting going, even what's. What did Matthew do with the 5/16 wrench? What's Dad going to do about the busted tire? But why wasn't considered much worth asking. Luke asked again, "Why'd you have to sell the woods?" Luke's dad harumphed and paused in the midst of shoveling forkfuls of boiled potatoes into his mouth. "Told you before, we didn't have a choice. Government wanted it. You can't tell the government no." Mother came over and gave Luke's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before turning back to the stove. They had defied the government once, with Luke. That had taken all the defiance they had in them, maybe more. "We wouldn't have sold the woods if we hadn't had to," she said, ladling out thick tomatoey soup. "The government didn't ask us if we wanted houses there." She pursed her lip as she slid the bowls of soup onto the table. "But the government's not going to live in the houses," Luke protested. At 12, he knew better, but sometimes still pictured the government as a very big, mean, fat person, 2 or 3 times as tall as an ordinary man, who went around yelling at people. "Not allowed, stop that." It was because of the way his parents and older brothers talked. "Government won't let us plant corn there again. Government's keeping the prices down. Government's not going to like this crop." "Probably some of the people who live in those houses will be government workers," Mother said. "It'll be all city people." If he'd been allowed, Luke would have gone over to the kitchen window and peered out at the woods, trying for the umpteenth time to picture rows and rows of houses where the firs and maples and oaks now stood, or had stood. Luke knew from a sneak peek right before supper that half the trees were now toppled. Some already lay on the ground. Some hung at weird angles from their former lofty positions in the sky. Their absence made everything look different, like a fresh haircut exposing a band of untanned skin on a forehead. Even from deep inside the kitchen, Luke could tell the trees were missing because everything was brighter, more open, scarier. And then, when those people moved in, "I have to stay away from the windows?" Luke asked, though he knew the answer. The question made Dad explode. He slammed his hand down on the table. "Then! You gotta stay away now!" Everybody and his brothers going to be trampling around back there to see what's going on. They'll see you. He waved his fork violently. Luke wasn't sure what that gesture meant, but he knew it wasn't good. No one had ever told him exactly what would happen if anyone saw him. Death? Death was what happened to the runt pigs who got stepped on by their stronger brothers and sisters. Death was a fly that stopped buzzing when the swatter hit it. He had a hard time thinking about himself in connection with the smashed fly or the dead pig gone stiff in the sun. It made his stomach feel funny even trying. "I don't think it's fair we've got to do Luke's chores now," Luke's older brother Mark grumbled. "Can't he go outside some? Maybe at night?" Luke waited hopefully for the answer, but Dad just said no without looking up. "It's not fair," Mark said again. Mark was a second son, the lucky son, Luke thought when he was feeling sorry for himself. Mark was 2 years older than Luke and barely a year younger than Matthew, the oldest. Matthew and Mark were easily recognizable as brothers, with their dark hair and chiseled faces. Luke was fairer, small-boned, softer looking. He often wondered if he ever looked tougher, like them. Somehow he didn't think so. Luke didn't do nothing. "No how," Matthew jeered. "We won't miss his work at all." "It's not my fault," Luke protested. "I'd help more if..." Mother laid her hands on his shoulders again. "Hush," All of you, she said. Luke will do what he can. He always has. The sound of tires on their gravel driveway came through the open window. Now who? Dad started. Luke knew the rest of the sentence. Who could that be? Why were they bothering him now? His first chance all day to sit down. It was a question Luke always heard at the end from the other side of the door. Today, skittish, because of the woods coming down, he scrambled up faster than usual, dashing for the door to the back stairs. He knew, without watching, that Mother would take her plate from the table and hide it in a cupboard, would slide his chair back into a corner so it looked like an unneeded spare. In 3 seconds, she would hide all evidence that Luke existed, just in time to step to the door and offer a weary smile to the fertilizer salesman or the government inspector or whomever else had come to interrupt their supper. That's the end of chapter 1. See you next time.